So thank you all, first of all, for joining us on this webinar where we'll cover how to manage your fixed assets through their entire life cycle. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we start. This will be a fairly quick 45-minute presentation. We'll do some Q&A at the end with you. If you see on the side of your screen there should be a question box. That's where you can put your questions. If you have any issues there should also be a chat. So if the questions box isn't working for some reason, throw them in the chat and we'll definitely be sure to address them. And feel free to do so throughout the presentation. And finally, we will be sure to send a copy of not only the slide deck, but the recording of today's presentation in a follow-up email either today or tomorrow. A little bit about Braincell. We were founded about 25 years ago. We pride ourselves in being unbiased business consultants, and we help companies thrive by solving their business challenges with guidance and technology. We specialize in ERP like Sage ERP, CRM, business intelligence, and marketing automation software. Today's presenter is Wayne Austin. He is joining us from Sage. He is a sales engineer for Sage Fixed Assets, and he covers the US, Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean, Asia, Central and South America, and Australia, so the world. Wayne has a tremendous amount of experience in the technology, telecommunications, and financial industries. And he is also a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. So Wayne, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you. One quick note on the agenda. So we are going to go through the complete life cycle of Sage Fixed Assets. We're going to show you the solution and touch on the planning, depreciation, tracking, and the custom reporting that's in there. And that'll all be part of that solution demonstration that we'll get to after Wayne goes through all of these different aspects here. And then, like I said before, we're going to wrap up with a live Q&A. So we will open the phone lines and unleash all of you folks to pepper us with all of the questions that you can possibly think of. So without further ado, Wayne, if you're ready, we're ready, and we'll hand it over to you to start the conversation.
Thank you, Kelly. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Wayne Austin. I'm with Sage Software, and I'm a sales engineer on the Fixed Asset Solution. Okay, Kelly, can you go ahead and hand me control? Thank you. All right. So where we're going to start off is just looking overall at the complete life cycle of fixed assets in general, just so that everyone has an understanding of what's fully encompassed in managing fixed assets from top to bottom, as well as where our solution is going to fall into that picture. So, of course, fixed assets can start life before they even become a fixed asset. So for those of you on the call that may have ongoing or recurring projects, be it construction in progress, work in progress, or whatever type of project that you may have going that will result in fixed assets being created, that would be the CIP portion or beginning phase before an asset is actually created. We do have a module that handles that, and I'll cover that in detail as well. Of course, the next phase in your fixed asset life cycle is going to be where you need to actually calculate depreciation for tax or for GAAP if you're handling both for a standard U.S. company, for example. If you're a government entity or nonprofit, of course, you would not be dealing with federal tax rules, but you certainly would be doing with the financial book side of things. All of those are critical areas for a particular business to be able to look accurately depreciate those assets. Now, the next portion of this really ties into all of this completely. Many companies, unfortunately, still do not do a complete physical inventory on a regular basis. Some it may be every few years, some not at all, but that is actually a portion of your fixed asset life cycle that can cost you significantly. For example, if you're not doing a physical inventory and 15% of your assets are no longer in service, you're still carrying them on the registry, and of course you're paying property taxes, insurance premium, that is a significant cost to your business. So doing a physical inventory, at least on an annual basis, is actually a very important piece of this. Now, the next phase of this, of course, is you need to be able to do proper disposals of these assets, be it full or partial disposals, once they reach the end of their useful life, or you're selling them off for whatever reason that you're taking out of service. You need to be able to accurately calculate your gain-loss information tied to disposing of these assets. And lastly, you need to be able to have accurate reporting on all of the above so that you can generate any type of reports you need for tax filing, for example, or simply for audit purposes. But you absolutely need to be able to do accurate reporting on all phases of your fixed asset lifecycle. So let's take a look at the Sage Fixed Asset Solution and how that is broken down. So if you look at the CIP portion, or before things become a fixed asset, that is where our planning module comes into play. You will be able to manage any type of in-progress projects you have, manage those capital budgets tied to that project, and be able to report on your spend against budget for those projects. Now, I'm going to go in greater detail in each of these modules so that you can actually see how this works. And part of my actual solution demonstration, where I'll go into the software, I will let you get to see how each of these pieces actually works. The depreciation side, of course, you want accurate calculation for tax or for book, where you can accurately depreciate these assets. The tracking module is what's going to be used for doing physical inventory and reconciling any of that data. Reporting, there's standard reporting built into all modules, but the additional piece here is custom reporting using SAP Crystal Reports, where you can generate any type of ad hoc reports that you may need. So let's take a deeper dive into each of these pieces. Now, in the planning module, if you take a look at the graphic to the right, this is actually a project snapshot that you can have open whenever you go into any particular project you have going. But you can see some key information as to what's going on with that project just by taking a quick look at this. You can see at the top left on the project what's spent or unspent of the budget, what's capitalized or what's the expense. So you can actually have either capitalized or expensed assets here. Okay. And if you look towards the bottom portion below project statistics, you can see your actual spend against an original as well as against a revised budget. So this gives you a comprehensive way of managing any of your CIP or recurring project needs before they become fixed assets. And you also will have the ability to send any of these items that are part of this project to the depreciation module to be placed in service, ready to start depreciation. Now, let's take a look at the depreciation module. This is actually the heart of the solution. We have currently 52 depreciation methods built into the solution. You also have the ability to create custom depreciation methods. And again, similar to the planning module, you have the ability to get a quick snapshot of what's going on with the assets in a particular company. You can create multiple companies within the solution, and you can easily see the same overview of each company as you open that company. On that graphic on the right, you're now able to see in the snapshot what's placed in service by quarter. And if you were able to click on the additional tabs there, you would be able to look at a depreciation comparison, looking at acquired value versus accumulated depreciation. And you can view this information by any of the books. Some other resources built into the depreciation module is actually an Audit Advisor. And you can think of this as your own personal assistant. You can run this at various points throughout the year. And what that's going to do is look at how you're currently depreciating assets in the particular book that you run this Audit Advisor for. It's going to flag anything that's a potential issue that could be a red flag for you being audited. It's going to show you what it sees as the issue, and it's also going to recommend a resolution. It would also create a group where any assets that are triggering that particular situation will be placed in that group, so you can easily refer to those and make any corrections you need. There are many standard reports actually built into the solution. You also have the ability to create different profiles where you can assign different users, different restrictions, or you can simply give everyone full access as needed. Some of those standard reports that are built in, especially when looking at the tax side of the house, you can generate your own 4562. You can also generate the tax expense report, which would be needed for actually reconciling that 4562. Some of the other standard tax reports include property tax reports. You can run your sale of property 4797 worksheet as well. So it's got a comprehensive solution of our reports built in addition to the ability to create ad hoc reports. Let's now focus on the tracking module. So this is where you are going to do physical inventories of your fixed assets. You can actually generate barcode labels and tag your assets and be able to do physical inventories where you can scan these barcodes using traditional scanners, rugged scanners, or you can also use an Android app on an Android phone or tablet, for example. We do not have the Apple iOS app available yet. That is still in development, but will come at a later date. Now, any of the groups you created in the depreciation side, for example, any templates you created, any customized fields you did in the general information fields, those are all available in the tracking module because the tracking module actually shares the same database as the depreciation module. However, in the tracking module, those users will not have the ability to make changes that can impact depreciation because that module will only focus on the general information fields and have no access to book fields. Just an example of some of the different devices you can use. You can use a traditional rugged scanner, or as I stated, you can use an Android app where you can use the phone camera or tablet camera to actually scan those barcodes when you're completing a physical inventory. And just something to note here, by the way, your depreciation module, tracking module, planning modules, those all require software license. However, the Android apps or the scanners do not use up a license. So if you have multiple people that you want to be able to push out an inventory list to complete a physical inventory, those devices would not be actually taking up a license. Custom reporting, that is actually generated by SAP Crystal Reports, and that gives you additional abilities inside the solution to add or remove different columns of data, but it also gives you the ability to create any type of ad hoc custom reports you choose. You can also export any of the standard reports out to a Crystal Reports format and further customize it there, or you can certainly export them out to Excel as well. Now, one of the benefits of this is that this Crystal Reports is fully integrated into the solution, and what that means to you is that it has access to every field in the database. So you can literally create anything you want to looking at any field in any company in that same database. So now I'm going to take a few moments and actually go into the solution where you'll be able to see some of this at work. So I'm going to actually go ahead and reopen my company just to show you how this is laid out. So I have a single database here with multiple companies. You can, of course, create multiple databases as well. There are multiple versions of the solution. The standard network version, there's a standard standalone version, and there is also a premier version, which I'm in, which runs on the SQL Server platforms. The primary difference with those, the standard version is a standalone single install on the workstation. The network version is a multi-user that's going to be a client-server type setting that runs on a Sybase database. And the Premier version is actually going to run on a client-server type setting with a SQL Server database. And the difference here is going to be capacity. The SQL Server version will handle over 1 million assets, whereas the standard version would be around 20,000 assets or so. Now, when I open up my company, this is the snapshot I gave you a screenshot of earlier. And of course, I can look at any of the information here by any of my books, my in-service by quarter, the depreciation comparison, looking at acquired value versus accumulated depreciation, looking at a 5-year spend, investment broken down by remaining life. So it gives you just a quick overview of what's going on, even total net value of all the assets, and that's broken down by what's active, disposed, inactive, and so on. Now, when you create your company, of course, you'll have multiple books in the system you can work with. So those of you that are doing the financial book only, for example, may turn off any of the other books that you're not using. Or, of course, you can have all the books active. The two on the far right are custom books that you can actually rename anything you choose. All versions do support short years, and you can also set book overrides here as well. For those of you that are working on an alternate reporting period, such as a 4, 4, 5, or 13 period, you would need to be on the Premier version of the solution. That is the only version that will support alternate reporting periods. So you could set up a 13 period or 4, 4, 5 and specify all of the conditions tied to that. Now, with each release that we come out with, we typically do our tax update in January. It's normally out by January 15th each year, but we also have the ability to come in and make interim changes if there are changes mid-year throughout the year. If you want to see what is included in the current release you're in, you go to Help, What's New, and Learn More, and it is going to show you the current tax rule changes that are in this release. So in this particular case, it includes all of the changes to the Bipartisan Budget Act from last year. And as a result of this tax rule change, we've actually added these 2 new depreciation methods for remaining value mid-month, remaining value half-year. And that would be for those of you that need to take advantage of these tax extenders, need to use that remaining value half-year. Feature changes we've also added in this release is including a bulk edit feature that allows you to make mass changes to depreciation methods or estimated life. You can also look further back, of course, especially for those of you doing the tax book, where you may want to research what are the rules surrounding bonus depreciation or Section 179. All of these are built in as a quick reference for you so that you can save some time not having to go out to the IRS website, having it available here as a quick look. If I go into one of my asset details here, looking at the book information fields, some important things here that I wanted to point out as far as some of these feature enhancements. So let's say you're currently taking advantage of the 168 allowance. As you know, that rule is retroactive back to September 28th of 2017. And let's say you're not taking 100% bonus on all those assets that qualify. You're only sitting at 50% on some of those assets that now qualify for 100% bonus. You can actually make that change en masse. If you go up to depreciation, we actually have a 168 allowance switch where you can change from 50% to 100% bonus, or even turn bonus off or on for any group of assets, all the assets, any fiscal year end you want to make that apply to, for any of the books you want to make that applicable to. Now, the system has all the rules, tax rules built in, so it is going to know based on that place and service date, property type, and the method that you're using, does this asset qualify for 100% bonus? So it will only make the changes to assets that do qualify. It is not going to change assets that don't qualify. So that eliminates the need for you to have to search and identify the specific assets. Just the actual fiscal year is what you need to identify, and any assets that qualify that were placed in service in that fiscal year will get changed. I mentioned the maker's convention switch a bit earlier. If you do need to make a change based on assets placed in quarter exceeding 40% in the fourth quarter, and you need to make that as a global change, you have that ability as well, where you can change from half year to a mid-quarter convention for your tax book or any book you want to make that change for. The bulk edit feature that I mentioned is what's going to give you the ability to make changes to depreciation methods and estimated life for any of the books. And that can be done as a global change or to any subset of the assets if you created any groups. And you can actually do that here. Depreciation, go to bulk edit. It will have you acknowledge that you've done a backup of your company, which is always a great idea when doing any type of mass changes. And I can choose which book I want to make changes for, which group of assets. And I can change depreciation methods from whatever they currently are to something else. And especially if you want to take advantage of that remaining value half year depreciation method, which you may need if you qualify for those tax extenders. We also have ADS depreciation methods built in as well. You can also change estimated life, or you can do both. So let me use an example here of making a change to estimated life. It will expect you to enter years and months, since the system does accommodate that. And I'm going to select a change to 21 years, which will be an invalid change for any of my tax book depreciation that's using a maker's formula or maker's depreciation method. I can choose to make this effective for assets depreciated as of a certain date. I can choose to also go back to my current depreciation through date, or I could make the changes back to my place in service date. But however, I can also choose to retain any beginning info. And what that means, if you notice in my internal book here, I have a beginning date of 3/24/2019, beginning year to date, 54.95, and begin accumulated depreciation, because I've done some adjustment on this asset that calculated the accumulated depreciation as of that date. If I do want to make a change like this but retain that data, I can do that as well by checking that box. Now, if I go to the next screen, it will actually validate it. And what that means is going to check each and every asset that will be impacted by this change for any of the books that I chose to change. And it will warn you if you are trying to make a change that is an invalid entry. So it keeps you out of trouble, in other words. If you take a look at this outputted report, you'll see here, since I chose to go back to the place in service date, it's issuing a warning, which is saying, hey, are you sure you want to change that since this asset is fully depreciated, which is something you probably would not normally do, because now you would, of course, need to go in and make that change in your journal, which you've already, of course, posted. The more important ones here are ones that are generating a hard error. These are actually invalid changes. Because I'm using Maker's Formula 200 for the tax book, it is telling me that a 21-year estimated life is not valid for that depreciation method. So it's preventing me from making a change that would be against the rules. So it really keeps you out of trouble and works very well. Now, for those of you who are currently using Sage 100, Sage 300, for example, this integrates directly with those ERP systems where you can create assets from the accounts payable module or from a purchase order module. With Sage 50, it's a one-way integration where it'll push that journal entry out to that particular ERP. Let me actually run the journal entry report so you can see what that looks like. All of the reports in the system, by the way, are going to be exportable in a variety of formats, including CSV. So if you're using a non-Sage ERP, for example, that we don't have a direct integration with, you can export something like this out to a CSV file and probably import it into that solution. We also have the ability through customization to create custom integration with other solutions, so that is certainly also an option. Whereas out of the box, we will integrate to some extent and it varies depending on the particular ERP with most of our solutions. Now, the system is really quite flexible in how it allows you to do disposals, transfers. You're able to do full or partial disposals, no problem in the system. And of course, the integration with the tracking module for doing physical inventories is one of the things I want to point out. These are your general information fields, and these are shared between this and the tracking module, whereas when I go into the tracking module, you'll see that there's actually no access to those book fields. So therefore, it keeps things pretty safe as far as anyone accidentally doing anything to impact your depreciation methods. For the planning module, that uses its own database, but however, it integrates with this and that is able to send assets to the depreciation module ready to start depreciation. When something is sent from the planning module, it actually creates an entry here, which is a group, which is going to have a date and timestamp, and I can select that. And if I send one asset, 100 assets, doesn't matter how many, at that time, they would all show up here. And the level of integration is as such that this particular asset was sent over, came over exactly as you're seeing here, ready to start depreciation, so no additional entry was required here for this asset to start depreciation. So for those of you that have recurring projects, this will actually save you quite a bit of time, including the fact that you can do all that great reporting on either side of this. So in the interest of time, let me actually go into the reporting and show you some of those reports that I talked about, and some of these reports you'll especially need when looking at your year-end processing. Of course, it's always a good idea to go ahead and do a physical inventory before closing out your year-end to make sure that you're able to do any of the disposals you need and be able to report on that. So I've shown you the journal entry. Now let's take a look at some of these tax reports that I talked about. The 4562. I'm going to run this for last year. And this will generate the actual fileable 4562. You'll have both pages, which you can then, of course, export. It's also going to generate that worksheet that goes along with the 4562, which you'll also need. And in addition, you'll need to run the tax expense report, which is then used for reconciling that 4562. And especially if you are doing the Section 179 or 168, you'll absolutely need this information as part of your reconciliation efforts with that 4562. All of these reports, by the way, can be sorted and subtotaled in any way you choose by asset class, asset categories, no problem in the system. There's also property tax reports, roll forward report, like fixed asset summary report. Go ahead and run that one. And all of these reports, of course, can be customized if you need to be able to add or remove different columns of data or go out straight to a custom report and create something there as well. So this is in the system. I'll show you how you can customize it in the system as well as out of the system. This is your fixed asset summary report, captures your beginning cost info, ending cost info, your total accumulated depreciation, all of your totals on the back end. Now, if you needed to customize any of these reports inside the system, as I stated, of course, you can come here to format reports, change the sort order, sort and subtotal by asset class, location, anything that's important to you. You can save that as a custom report. The standard reports are in gray. Anything you see in yellow is a customized version of that report that I saved. This particular one, I actually went further where I customized this and added current net book value as a column, total to give me a total. So you can do quite a bit of customization in the system, as well as going out to Crystal reports where you can actually launch a full-blown Crystal report and create anything you need ad hoc from scratch. And this also is going to give you the ability, of course, to tie into any field in any company if you needed to build some type of ad hoc report, fully integrated into the database. Now, of course, you can run depreciation for any period in time you choose so that you can do reporting in the past and the future. There are also some projection reports built in. You can actually place an asset in service out in the future that would actually be picked up by those projection reports. Here, for example, is one I created that is placed in service in 2020. So if, for example, you know of some projects coming down the pipe, you want to be able to run some projection reports to see how those are going to impact future years' depreciation, you can actually do that. The annual projection report is actually one that will run side by side multiple books if you need to take a look at that, for example, and you can look at this up to 99 years out, starting from any fiscal you choose. And this one will actually show full year depreciation for each year that you selected, and you can sort and subtotal this by any category that you choose. And as you can see here, it is actually showing me full year depreciation for each of the books I selected for the number of years. There's also a monthly projection that will give you a more granular view of this, and I can choose which fiscal I want to look at. So let's take a look at 2020, for example, here. This one will give you a monthly period expense and year to date for each period during that fiscal. As we all know, year ends can be challenging, so having robust reporting capability is going to be important, but also have the ability to look out into the future for future year projections is also going to be important. If you could take a look at this, April 30th, 2020, that's where I have that asset placed in service. I can actually drill down in this one and go to the individual asset details where you'll see that that particular asset is being picked up out in the future. If you look at the same information for the internal book, which is straight line, it'll still be picked up, but of course, since I'm using straight line, it is not going to create a big jump as you saw on that previous example with the tax book. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in reporting and forecasting to meet anything that you need as far as fixed asset depreciation for current year, looking back in the past for reporting purposes, or going out into the future. So let's take a moment and go into the planning module and see how that works as far as sending information to the depreciation side of things. You can, of course, have multiple projects going, similar to the depreciation side, a quick snapshot showing you what's going on in your project, what's spent or unspent of the budget, what's capitalized or expense. And you do have the ability, by the way, to have either capitalized or expense assets here. You can see your actual spend against an original as well as a revised budget. And you would actually set that up in your project settings where you'll identify some approved amount or budgeted amount. And of course, if that number changed due to revisions and cost increases that are unforeseen, you can create a revised budget and report against either. The way my current project is laid out, and you can use this for any type of projects really, each of these individual line items are what's going to become a fixed asset. And of course, you can drill down where you'll have some fields that you can customize. You can even map any of these fields from the planning module to general information fields in the depreciation side. If you do want to capture vendor information, estimated hours, AFE numbers, or anything pertinent that you may need. At the individual asset level as well here, you can set an original and a revised budget identified as capitalized or expense. And below this is where you're going to have all of the transactions coming from accounts payable, purchase orders, whatever type of transaction, which will be a rolling addition to the cost of this asset. Your final spend is what's actually going to become a fixed, the total value for that fixed asset. you again have fields that you can customize, and my total spend here is what actually becomes the acquisition value. Now, let me go to an asset that I've not sent over and go to the Asset Information tab. This is where you can tell its spending is complete, set a completion date, set an in-service date, and I can even split this into multiple assets of equal or different values. Once I'm ready to create any asset that's been flagged as spending is complete, I can simply go here, line items, create assets, and anything that is ready to be placed in service is going to be available here, where I can simply select a couple of them if I need to just send these two over, choose what company I want to send it to, or I can simply select all and send them over at one time. Reporting, of course, on this is going to be important as well. There are some consolidated reports built in. If you need to look at multiple projects, for example, the one I'm in, as well as my additional project here, I can run this against my original budget or my revised budget in full detail, each line item, in other words, or in subtotals only. So for a quick glance, you may use subtotals only as an example here, where I can quickly see what my budget was for this project, my actual spend, and in this case, I'm under budget, and I'm seeing that information for each of my projects. You can, of course, drill down and look at the individual details, where even though I'm under budget for the entire project, I have some assets here that are over budget. Of course, you can choose to run the entire thing expanded out, where you'll see all the details for all assets, and there are many other standard reports that you can run here as well. And you also have the ability to do custom reporting here with Crystal Reports again. So you can build any type of ad hoc reports you want to, refresh the data when you open it, since your projects are a dynamic environment, and be able to see any information you choose about any project with any type of ad hoc report that you may build. Again, you have access to every field in the database, so you can be as creative as you need to be with these reports. Now, let's take a look at the tracking module for doing physical inventories. So I mentioned you will have the option of using a standard, rugged scanner, or you can use an Android device such as an Android phone or Android tablet, where you can push out an inventory list out to multiple devices. Of course, these devices do not use up a license. The Android app is free. If you're using a scanner, you can certainly push it out to that, whereas just the tracking software actually needs a license. You'll be able to scan these barcodes, update any of the fields you pushed out as part of that inventory process, even take a picture of the asset and attach it, and then be able to send this data back. Now, this does not need to be an active phone. It simply needs to be able to connect to Wi-Fi briefly, and just long enough really to download the inventory list, which is sent out over Microsoft OneDrive, and they can go off-site, do their inventory, come back in the building, reconnect to Wi-Fi, send that data back to the system. Now I'm going to go into the tracking module so we can see how that all comes together. It does have the ability to check out assets to people. So if you do have something that is has been checked out, you can certainly say, yes, I want to see what has not been returned, look at the details, any images of the assets that you have attached. And there's also a report which you can run just to see if you have multiple items checked out, or I can look globally at everything to see what historically has been checked out or checked back in and returned. It's going to show you that tag number, what it is, when it was checked out, who checked it out, and if it was returned, when it was returned. If it has not, it'll flag it as late. So you can then know who to contact. Now, if you notice, looking at the asset information here, I do have all the general fields information available, but I do not have access to any of the book fields. So in addition to the 28 fields you have on the depreciation side, the tracking module adds an additional 12 fields that you can certainly rename anything you choose and capture some additional information that may not be pertinent to the accounting side, maybe just something needed by asset managers or IT managers for information they may need. So you can leverage using those fields for that purpose. Any of the groups that were created in the depreciation module are also here, and any of these groups you have defined by any criteria, you can certainly use that as an inventory list. So for example, if I wanted to create an inventory list of assets at a particular building, I can do that and send that out as my inventory list where someone can go through, complete that physical inventory, get that data back, and actually go through the reconciliation process. Now, of course, once you've completed an inventory, just due to time constraint, I'm not going to actually be able to walk through a complete inventory here, but I do want to show you the reconciliation report because this is how you identify ghost assets. So if I go and run this reconciliation report for the last physical inventory I did, you will be able to generate this at the end of that inventory. And the main thing you need to see here, because this is what's costing your company money, the assets that were not found. It's going to identify the tag number, what it is, and have an exception code of N for not found. Anything found with no changes will have a status of O. Anything found with changes that you accepted will have a status of C. But this, of course, I can easily now export this to an Excel spreadsheet, circulate this to the various departments, even when it can identify it. But these are costing you money three ways. They're not in service, you're paying insurance premium for them, and property taxes for them. So these are what we call ghost assets that can have significant cost. If you do want to get an idea of what the potential cost to your company is, you can actually go out to the website and click on the ROI calculator, where you can actually punch in, the scenario for yours. So if you'll take a look at this particular scenario here, I'll actually make this, let's say, $2 million for my total asset value. These are industry averages of 15% of our ghost assets, 40% remaining value. And you can see in just that scenario, I could easily have $300,000 worth of assets missing out there. Federal tax rate is now 21%. You can certainly change that. You can change your state tax rate, property tax rates, insurance premium rates. And just at a quick glance of this, you can see overpayment for personal property taxes is $4,000 here. Insurance premium, $3,000 here. So your potential first-year savings is pretty significant. So this is a live calculator. You can look at your particular scenario to see how this is impacting your business. So in order to leave some time now for question and answers, let me take a pause, and I'm going to switch back to the main section where we can take a look and see if we do have any questions in the chat, and have some time to respond to all of those for you.
Great. Thanks, Wayne. We did get a couple of questions, and I've fielded a few of them, but just so the rest of the group knows what was brought over to us, one attendee asked if there was a limit on how many assets can be handled by the fixed assets module, and also if there's a limit on how many sub-assets under a main asset can be handled.
Okay, so in the different versions, the only one that actually has a limit is the light version of the solution. And I actually have a comparison chart here, and it's really going to be performance-based for the standard version. And the standard version, you'll actually typically want to change over when you start hitting around the 20,000 mark. It is not a hard stop. It really is going to depend on, do you have attachments and everything, the horsepower of the machine you're on. But the typical transition point of going from the standard to the SQL Server version is somewhere between the 10 and 20,000 asset range. The SQL Server version will handle over 1 million assets per company, and no problems there as far as capacity. We have customers running more than 1 million assets in their system.
Okay, great. Couple other questions that came through. on the modules, are all of the modules included, or is this something that a customer could just purchase the modules a la carte, or just the modules that they need?
Oh, sure. You can actually purchase just a single module. For example, you can get depreciation only, which is the heart of the system, which is what most people will start with. You can also, of course, add the planning module if you've got recurring projects. And most people, of course, will be adding the tracking module, because once people start looking at that ROI calculator and realizing what it can cost them, not knowing what's missing, people tend to start doing physical inventories. So the most common combination is depreciation and tracking.
Okay, great. Another question that just came in is, does the fixed assets module integrate with the intercompany module, and does it post intercompany entries?
Intercompany module, I'm not sure what you mean there, but this will integrate with the ERP systems like 100, 300, for example, where that has a pretty direct integration. With some of the other solutions, it may be integration of pushing a journal entry outbound to that system.
Okay, yeah, I think they're referring to the intercompany transactions module that exists within, I believe it's Sage 300.
Oh, okay. So for Sage 300 in particular, let's say, if you're on Sage 300C, this will actually send that journal entry out for Sage 300 to retrieve it. If you need to be able to create an asset from the accounts payable module, that's a one-to-one, so you can create a single asset from AP. On the purchase order side, it's one-to-many. I can take a single PO and create 1,000 assets if I choose to.
Okay, great. Thank you. Folks, please feel free to keep sending the questions in. Oh, here's another one. Is there specific scanning software that's used for tracking in Sage Fixed Assets?
Okay, so the typical standard, that's out there as far as types of barcode is barcode 39. So if you take a look at this layout, for example, right, where you scan that barcode, it's going to correspond to an asset ID. That asset ID number is what's actually in the asset ID field in the database. Now, you can use the Android app, as I stated. It's going to use the camera on that device to scan the barcode. For scanners that we sell, they come pre-configured to work with our solution, and there's a few different brands that use Intermect and a few of others like that come pre-configured to work with our solution.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question we've got here. If you transfer an asset to a different location or area, will the fixed assets module create an automatic email to a group that I guess is predetermined to notify that assets have been transferred? Is there any workflow that exists in that regard?
Okay, that's a very good question. You can transfer, of course, an asset pretty easily in the system here, but it's not going to generate a notification. But what you can do, you've done a transfer, and actually just to point out a couple of other things with that, you can transfer within the current company if you choose to. You can also transfer between companies of the same entity type. So standard US to a standard US, a Canadian to Canadian, nonprofit to nonprofit, and so on, because of the different tax rules. As part of the transfer, you can also transfer as disposal, where you can use fair market value, current net book value, whatever you need for cash proceeds. So it'll show up as a disposal in the company it's leaving or department it's leaving and transfer over. If you're just doing a standard transfer, you can, of course, update things like, let's say it's a different cost center, different GL account, different department. All of those things can be changed as part of the transfer. And the end result you will get out of that is being able to run the transfer report. What that transfer report is going to show you for whatever period of time you want to look at. You can look at a month, a year, or years. It's going to show you any of those transactions that occurred during that time. It's going to show you where the asset transferred from and to, and it's also going to capture the accumulated depreciation info before and after that transfer. So looking at this particular asset here, you can see it was transferred from store 1 to store 2, my acquired value, my prior accumulated depreciation, current accum, and it's starting off exactly where the previous asset left off under the new department. So it will capture all of this notification, so you could certainly run this report, and you can, of course, export it and email off to someone. But it is not going to generate a notification email outbound to say, hey, this asset just transferred from here to there.
Understood. Thank you. Another question came in about the deployment, Wayne. So is this a cloud application? Is this something that resides on the user's premises, on their own servers? Is it hosted? Can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Oh, sure. So it is a client server set up for the networked version, such as the standard network or the SQL server. If you're doing a single standard workstation install, it's going to be installed local on that workstation. Now, even though it is an on-premise client server application, it can be hosted. So we have hosting providers we work with, or if you have your application hosted by someone else, you can certainly have them host this application as well. Now, it does support Citrix, terminal services, virtual desktop infrastructure, those type of remote access. So if you're using those in your environment as well, or even part of your hosted deployment, those are all supported.
Wonderful. And the last one I have here is, where can I find out more about the year-end procedures, or where can I see more about the year-end procedures in fixed assets?
Oh, okay. So I actually talked about that a little bit during the slide presentation, because of course many of these reports that I focused on here were actually part of what most people are going to need for their year-end processing. Now, we actually have a collaborative environment called Sage City, where you can, of course, go out. It's used by partners, users, or developers, where people actually share lots of information. There's actually a year-end center out there where you can even download a year-end checklist and look at some, good potential workflows for how to really handle all of your year-end processes and procedures. The year-end checklist is a great tool to make sure that you're being consistent and all of your staff are being consistent with how they're handling your year-end fixed asset processes.
Great. Yep, I totally agree, especially on the resources that are available, especially within Sage City. I'm on there all the time, and you guys will probably see posts by me or questions answered, but it's a really good place for just, any questions come up if you want to get, any kind of help from a Sage user and get their perspective on something. It's a really great tool, and especially since, like you said, Wayne, it has that year-end processing checklist. And so, folks, if anybody has any trouble getting into Sage City or any questions about that year-end process checklist, don't hesitate to reach out. Let me know, and I'll make sure that we can get you set up. So I think that looks like that was it for the questions. But of course, please feel free to reach out to me, everyone, if you have any additional questions. If you'd like to schedule a one-on-one demo, we can definitely do that as well. But fear not, we will be reaching out and following up with all of you to make sure that you got this recording as well. Probably be hearing from us tomorrow or the next couple of days. But want to thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. Wayne, thank you very much for your great presentation and for answering all of those questions, providing that great feedback. And so that's it, everyone. Like I said, stay tuned for the recording, and we look forward to speaking with you all again very soon. Have a great rest of your day.